up and get it rolling because this might be a long one. I think collectively the five of us believes the most important position that we're going to be looking at is going to be offensive line. If anybody says I'm wrong, feel free to keep your mouth shut. And Paul, I think you were tasked with the O line, so I'm going to tee you up. I think I know who you're going to pick first, so I'll put some highlights up and I'll let you run away with it, brother.
Okay, sounds good. So I'm going to talk about offensive line. Before I start talking about some of the players, I do just want to give a little bit of an overview about the current state of our offensive line and kind of explain why I think it's important that we place uh, a lot of importance on this position in the draft. So by the end of 2024, we're projected to have 6 offensive linemen off our books. In addition to that, we have 3 linemen who have been pretty important for us over the last few years, and Leno, Cornelius Lucas, and Andrew Norwell, who have 8 or more years of experience. So, I mean, those guys are showing signs of wear and tear. They're a little long in the tooth. And we got another 3 linemen that have less than 3 years of experience in Chris Paul, Sam Cosme, and Sadiq Charles. And none of those guys to this point have really inspired any confidence in our team. I mean, Cosme was a second round pick, but he hasn't lived up to that to this point. So there's serious questions in regards to that as well. So I guess what I'm trying to say is we have a definite need for talent infusion along the offensive line. Priority number 1 has to be to set Sam Howell up for success. And you can't do that without stability along that offensive line. So I, for one, would not be disappointed. In fact, I would applaud it if we pick 2 guys on the offensive line within day 1 and day 2. The one thing that stuck out to me when I analyzed and not analyzed, but reflected back on our offensive line is the fact that there's not a Mr. Reliable anymore. We used to always be able to have a Mr. Reliable, whether it was Brandon Sheriff, regardless of what you thought about him, or Trent Williams or Chris Samuel. There was always a reliable cog on our offensive line. And if you look at our line right now from left to right, we're projected to put out Charles Leno, potentially Chris Paul or Andrew Norwell at left guard, Roulier or Nick Gates at center, Cosme at right guard, and Andrew Wiley at right tackle. There's no model of consistency there, none whatsoever. I mean, we've seen these guys play well in spurts, but there isn't consistency there either from a level of play or from a durability standpoint. So we really, really have to focus on finding trust and reliability along our offensive line in this coming draft. So in focusing on players, I tried to identify players that we can count on, guys that can come in fairly soon and fairly quickly and give us that sense of reliability that we're desperately seeking along our offensive line. So the first guy that I'm going to talk about is an offensive guard from Florida, goes by the name of Osiris Torrance. He's considered probably to be the very best guard prospect in the 2023 draft. He's the kind of guy that, based on mock drafts and things that I've read, he should be a player that is available there at spot 16, I believe, or he can also be a guy that we potentially consider trading a bit down in the first round to potentially grab. So he's 6'5", he's 330 pounds. He's a very, very large man, and that's going to be a theme in the players that I talk about today. They're all mammoth guys. They're huge, huge guys, and that seems to be something that the team has been interested in, especially when you look at who we've visited with and who we've planned private visits with. They're all offensive linemen that are just massive, huge bodies. So Torrance played 3 years at Louisiana. He was a raging Cajun. Interesting fact about this guy is in his entire career, he has not given up a sack as an interior lineman. He played his first 3 years at Louisiana, but then transferred to Florida for his senior year. And even with a stronger conference, improved, in more quality play in that conference, he still played outstanding as a senior. He's got a lot of experience, 48 college games, He's played over 3,000 snaps. And that's really been a theme with Ron Rivera teams. We seem to draft guys that have a lot of college experience for the most part. I mean, there's always an exception or two, but he certainly checks that box. He's a really, really nasty player. He's considered to be absolutely dominant in the run game. He's received comparables to Larry Allen, who just always showed extremely raw power and was that mauling type of lineman. He's considered to be really light on his feet, and he's thought of as being someone that is a Pro Bowl potential caliber player. Some people believe that had he played tackle, he could easily be viewed as a top 10 pick in this draft. But as an interior lineman, he's certainly a promising prospect and someone that should excite Commanders fans if we were to elect to draft him. So that's my little spiel on Torrance. I'm going to try to make it quick because I have 4 guys all together. And I realize that you guys all have people you want to speak about as well. The next guy that I would like to talk about is someone that is potentially a day 2 target. And this guy here is probably one of the players that I'm really intrigued by and one of the players that I get quite excited about. So in terms of a guy that we could potentially target on day 2, probably we would have to get him in the 2nd round if he's even available at that point, because he's thought very highly of throughout league circles. It's Steve Avila, played for TCU. He's also an interior lineman. Again, a massive body, 6'4", 334 pounds. He was an All-American for the last 2 years. He could legitimately be a guy that you could think of as being someone that you can lock into your left guard spot from day 1. So, you know, if he's a day 2 pick, you can lock him in at left guard and probably have no concerns about it. He's the type of player, in learning about him for myself personally, he checks off all those boxes as being a Ron Rivera type player. He exhibits all the Ron Rivera attributes. He checks off the experience box. He checks off the versatility box. He has played every position in his college career along the offensive line, with the exception of left tackle. He has played more than 30 games at TCU, so obviously has a lot to bring to the table in terms of experience, as I said. His coach speaks very, very highly of him from a leadership standpoint. We're all familiar with the success that TCU had this past season. And Steve Avila was thought of as being basically that locker room presence that helped to will that team to having such a successful year. He's considered to be a true pro, someone that you're going to be able to put into your lineup and not have any concerns or worries about being able to acclimate himself to the pro game. Much like O'Cyrus Torrance, he's considered to also be one of those bully type players. We lacked that killer instinct along our offensive line. We lacked that physicality, in my estimation, this past season. We got pushed around a lot, and the guys that I'm going to be talking about tonight are not really guys that get pushed around. Avila checks off that, that box of being able to consistently win at the line of scrimmage. He's really, really physical. He's always seeking work. He always wants to hit somebody. He's considered to be a good pass protector as well. He anchors really well against power rushers. He's only given up. He actually, in his senior year, I have written down here that he didn't give up any sacks and only gave up 10 hurries and over 500 passing snaps for TCU this past year. One of the concerns with him, if you were to read about some of the knocks on the guy, is lateral movement. If he's forced to be reactionary, he can sometimes have issues. But in those phone booth type situations, he's going to really excel and definitely not get pushed around. So in regards to Avila and Torrance, those are both guys. I don't know if I mentioned it already, but they're both guys that Washington has scheduled private visits with. So that should be something that we give consideration to. The third guy that I'm going to talk about, I'm sorry, I'm going to try to make this quick. Day 3 target out of UCLA, Antonio Mafi. This guy's got a pretty cool story. Again, another mountain of a man, 6'4", 339 pounds, an interior lineman. He has played, he has previously played nose tackle for UCLA. He made 24 appearances earlier in his college career with the Bruins at nose tackle. He has appeared in 55 games as a Bruin, tied for most in school history. So that is a sign of the guy's durability. I talked about being able to have guys and bring in guys that we're going to be able to count on and trust. And from a durability standpoint, it sounds like we would really be able to trust this guy based on what he's been able to do in that category to this point in his career. So versatility is something that Ron Rivera players need to exhibit. He's shown the ability to be a quick learner and a quick study, being able to transition from the defensive side of the ball and become an interior offensive lineman. So that should be an encouraging sign and something that's pretty promising about him. This is another guy that is just checks off that nastiness and that, being able to play that bully ball type role. He's not pushed around. He's a really, really huge body. He's considered to be a freight train at the point of attack. So the guy will just look to obliterate people at all opportunities. He's considered to be a really strong and elite run blocker. And with a guy like Brian Robinson, I get the sense that we want to have some guys up front that are just going to be able to match the physicality that he shows as a runner along the offensive line as well. So matching those play styles with our running backs and offensive linemen, that seems to be a common theme. Mafi was another guy that Washington has had a private visit with, or has scheduled a private visit. So there may or may not be some interest there. So similar to Steve Avila, one of this guy's concerns is lateral agility. He's not necessarily a swift mover, but again, in one-on-ones, it's going to be pretty hard to beat the guy. Another concern in regards to Mafi is a lack of experience. So he's only got one full season at left guard. He's been playing offensive line for the past bit with the Bruins, but only actually one full season at the left guard position. So this is considered to be one of those raw players, but one of those guys that, can have a high ceiling, having some opportunities to develop on the bench and, take on a depth role early in his career might be a pretty good fit for him. So that could potentially be a day 3 target. The last guy that I want to talk about, and I know I've talked about just interior linemen for the most part here, and some people might be saying, well, what about the tackle position? One of the guys that I was thinking about talking about was Darnell Wright out of Tennessee. He's considered to be a good tackle prospect that might be available when Washington picks. But one of the things that I thought about is Charles Leno is currently sitting on our team. He's set to make just over $9 million this upcoming season. I know he had his struggles this past year, but at the same time, he was a player that, surprised us for the most part and was pretty consistent for Washington in the years prior to 22. I think they're going to give him another chance at left tackle, and they've brought in Wiley. So I don't necessarily think we're going to go with a tackle in the first round. If we do go O-line in the first round, I think it'll be for one of the interior positions. I can see us bringing in potentially someone who is more of the developmental type at the tackle position, someone that can maybe sit for a year and then seamlessly transition after Leno leaves, likely after this year. So I thought that DeJuan Jones might be, a potential target in that regard. So similar theme with Jones. He's a guy that Washington has scheduled a private visit with. This is probably the biggest of the linemen that are available in the draft. He's 6'8", he's 374 pounds. Second team all Big Ten for the past 2 years. As we know, Ohio State had one of the top offenses in the country. I believe they were number 1 this past season, and he was a big part of that. He played right tackle, obviously for Ohio State, but some people do believe that he has the potential to become a left tackle. And this might be a player that, if we did have thoughts of potentially making him a left tackle at some point, having a season to be able to marinate on the bench and learn the ins and outs of the position, might be a decent fit in that regard. So obviously this guy is a giant. He's a mountain of a man. His size gives him a major advantage when working against like speed or power rushers or whatnot. I talked about that reliability and trust factor. The guy has only gave up 4 pressures this past season and no sacks allowed. I mean, he's a big man, but he's fairly athletic as well. He did receive some Division I basketball offers as well, so I think that points a little bit to his athletic ability. Much like all the other guys I talked about, he's just going to manhandle his targets in a run game. He doesn't really get overpowered because of his size in pass protection, but one of the concerns with him is mobility. So his size kind of limits him in terms of, you know, what he can do from a mobility standpoint. He doesn't have the best foot speed as well. His 10-yard split in the combine was like in the 4th percentile, so it was quite low. And I know that 10-yard distance or that 10-yard split is what they often pay most attention to with offensive linemen. Basically, he's relying on his hands. He's relying on his size to win battles at this point in his career. So all in all, that wraps up what I wanted to say. But just to go back to circle back to what I talked about at the start, it's going to be all about trust and reliability and finding guys that can provide that offensive line with a much needed level of reliability. And I feel like our prospects that I've featured here check those boxes. Mafi's gives you that reliability from the durability standpoint. Osiris Torrance checks off that trust and reliability box in terms of being a guy that's never given up a sack in his career. Same thing with Steve Avila this past season, clean sheet in terms of sacks. DeJuan Jones, same thing, clean sheet in terms of sacks as a senior. So you know what you're going to get from these guys week in, week out. There has to be, it seems as though there might be an emphasis and an interest for Eric Bieniemy and company offensively to basically not get pushed around anymore on the offensive line. And I think that these 4 guys are 4 guys that are able to provide you with a lot of that physicality that we seem to be lacking up front. And I think that that's exactly what you need in the NFC East to win. And it's exactly what you need to win the old-fashioned way in the NFC East. And I think that any of these guys would be, you know, hopefully welcome additions to our line.
That's a great job, Paul. Can I ask you a quick question? You said at the top that you didn't expect the team to go OL at 1 overall. Is there anybody that you looked at that you would be very excited if we did take at 16?
So the 3 guys that I was doing a little bit of reading about and trying to educate myself about that would probably be guys that maybe you should really, really consider if they're there are Peter Skoronsky, Paris Johnson, and the other guy, Broderick Jones from Georgia. But from everything that I read and a lot of the mock drafts that are out there, those guys seem to be long gone before 16. But I think you have to, you know, heavily consider it. If one of those guys is there at 16, maybe you jump on it. I didn't really talk about them because, again, I just don't think they're going to be there. And then the next most highly rated guy after them is that Darnell Wright guy out of Tennessee. And by all sounds of it, it seems like 16 might be a bit too high to pick him there. And I don't necessarily know if you want to use the 16th pick to pick him at that spot when, again, you have Leno for another year. You're paying him $9 million. You just signed Wiley to be your right tackle. So I kind of feel like they ride it out with those 2 and maybe focus a bit more on the interior.
Well done. I'm not following you.
I was gonna. You want to pause? You want to pause for a 10-second station break, and then we can come back to somebody else?